Afternoon, everybody. Today we're back with another cool installment of our sideshow we call Rock and Roll Detention. This is the show where we get a chance to take a deep dive into either an album, a song, a tour, or what we're doing today, a particular band. And on the heels of the announcement of this big summer, spring U.S. tour, ACDC, we're lucky enough to have returning to the show our friend Jesse Fink. You remember Jesse's the author of these 3 stellar ACDC books. Well, he's here to talk about his top 5, 6, 7 ACDC songs. And we have a listener that's been a longtime ACDC fan of the show, and just a general ACDC fanatic. So, Jesse Fink, welcome back to Metal Mayhem RLC. How you doing, buddy?
Good to see you, John. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Few weeks.
Again, yeah, 2024, the third installment of the ACDC trilogy, Bond, Notes from the Highway. How's the reception been since it came out in October, I believe?
Yeah, really good. I mean, it was something that I did myself, so, I'm promoting it myself, and, I don't have the backing of a sort of a New York publisher to do this. So, all the publicity is generated mostly through Facebook. So it's a word of mouth thing, really, but it's done well, and, it's sort of achieved what I wanted to do with it. Just get it out there and get people talking about, what's in the book.
We're talking because our guest today, like I said, it's our friend Tyler Hahn. Ty, welcome to the show. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Vern. Jesse, I've read 2 out of the 3 books. Notes from the Highway is the one I've yet to tackle. I'm actually interested potentially in some of the other writing that you've done. I know enough to know that you've written a few books on football with an Australian view, and I'll let you know right now I'm an Ange Postecoglou fan. So
we could talk for hours about that, mate.
We could. I don't think John would be interested, but yeah, we could.
I've been on Twitter all morning about bloody Ange Postecoglou. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what that is, but there's a nice connection. And Tyler was telling me before his history. He read the first book, the Young's book. Did it? Right. Ty, you tell the story, this quick story. Tell Jesse.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly when I read it, but it was many years ago that I was aware of that first book, The Youngs, and read that book. And then through Vern, learned of you and your Facebook page, which I subsequently joined, and purchased the book prior to Notes from the Highway, not having any idea that you had written the one that I had read years ago. I just recently made that connection. So, but it just makes me more interested in the trilogy, truthfully.
Yeah. I mean, writing 3 books about ACDC was not something that I intended to do when I wrote the first one. I sort of had become a sort of an accidental ACDC historian, I guess. But, what's struck me over the years that I've been talking about ACDC and Bond in particular is just how passionate people are about it, 50 years later. I mean, a lot of people sort of lead their lives around this band. It's not just sort of wearing T-shirts and going to concerts. It's actually sort of, spending their lives on social media, debating every possible kind of topic you can imagine, related to the band. So they're very passionate fans. And there's still a lot of stories to be written. I'm not going to rule out writing a 4th one.
We're all ACDC fans. I got into the band back in '79. Tyler, let me bring up this picture. We'll share this real quickly. Tell us your history of ACDC. How'd you get into the band?
Yeah, so picture in the center is the oldest picture. I believe this is 1981, perhaps maybe 1982. And I date it by the motorcycle and the T-shirt, which I may or may not still own, but definitely don't still fit into. But that was a House of Guitars purchase, Vern. Very early. I'm pretty sure. I know Back in Black was out by then, but have been a fan since perhaps before that. Picture on the left is a high school era Halloween party. So we're talking maybe 1982, 1983. That is from the waist up an Angus Young outfit that not everybody knew who I was, but that was the attempt. And on the far right is a very recent picture. The singer's name is Steve. His last name is unpronounceable by me. Although I hit Postacoglu pretty well. He is a singer in a tribute band called Bonfire that is from this area. And every time those guys come around, I love to go see those guys.
Well, that's great work on our investigative team here at Metal Mayhem ROC. They got on the street and they dug this up. Jesse, again, when did you get into ACDC? Because you're not, no disrespect, but I think you're late to the game. Tell us your history with the band.
I got into ACDC around 2012 or so, and this sort of came out of a relationship breakdown, really. And I was feeling suicidal one night, wanted to go out and sort of walk in front of a garbage truck and instead put on a copy of Powerage, and that was like an epiphany for me. It sort of got me out of this terrible kind of emotional state that I was in. I felt really kind of energized and felt more optimistic about my life after listening to this rock and roll, which is the effect of rock and roll on people, I think. And wanted to write a book about sort of how AC/DC saved my life that night. And that was really the starting point of me going to my publisher in Australia and suggesting a book on the Youngs. And then she said, well, why don't you make it about George Young as well, who's the older brother? And so I set out to kind of write a book that was like a combination of a history of AC/DC and a sort of a biography of the brothers as best that I could do it without their cooperation, but was also about the power of rock and roll, which is why the book opens, with me in an art gallery in New York, looking at a $120 million painting and not feeling the kind of the impact, the resonance, the overwhelming kind of appreciation of its brilliance, and then sort of walking out onto the street, putting my headphones on and putting on Back in Black and just being completely fucking blown away. And so the book was about, I think, the snobbery, the elitism around certain kinds of art and why we look down on rock and roll as a form of art. And I wanted to pay respect, really, I guess, to Angus and Malcolm for the art that they created, which was powerful for its simplicity. And that is the essence of kind of AC/DC, I think. So that was the starting point for me. And then obviously that book did well, and my publisher wanted me to do another book on AC/DC, and I ended up writing 2 more. But that was the personal connection that I had.
Well, it's a great starting point. And, I'm sure Powerage is viewed by many, myself included, as one of the top, if not top, AC/DC album. That being said, Tyler, kick this off. Again, round robin, loosely, your 5th entry, all-time AC/DC songs.
Yep. So hard to get to 5 because, as has been discussed, this band changed the direction of at least my musical life, and in some ways my life, just because I had never heard a band like this before, ever. And it really shaped the music that I listened to over the next many years. So getting right to it, number 5 from the 1976 High Voltage International release, side 1, song 2 is Bon Scott singing Rock and Roll Singer. It's the story to me. All of Bon's lyrics always tell a story, which is a dramatic difference between the Brian Johnson version of the band, as we know. And Rock and Roll Singer, to me, describes Bon's rise to becoming the lyricist for AC/DC. It talks about his relationship with his parents and how they were disappointed with the path that he was taking. It has the cleverness of all of his lyrics. It's got the twists in it, like when he rhymes at the very end, I want to be a rock and roll star. And then he chimes in at the last line, yes, I are. That's a very Bon style lyric. And the other part of it is that's a little bit unique to the song is it opens more or less with a solo. Not many AC/DC songs do this. Some do. but this one starts with a solo, has a solo in the middle. So it's a really classic track. I love the sound. I love Phil Rudd's swing in the song and how it moves along. And it's number 5 for me.
We call that Bonisms, and it's sprinkled throughout the Bon era. And, you know, quite honestly, you see some of it later on in the early Brian era. But a great choice. Again, you can't go wrong. These songs like old friends, just a matter of who you want to hang around with that particular time. Jesse, what do you got for 5?
Yeah, I'm just working through my list right now as we speak. I'll say Live Wire, which was on the same album, which is this fantastic song that basically AC/DC opened with on all of their live shows, I think for years, sort of right up until Bond's death. It was the sort of the staple of their of all their live shows, and it has this incredible sort of build up that starts with this sort of the bass line and the guitars come in, and then it's like this fucking explosion of power. And I think it's like the kind of the essence of what AC/DC do so well. And it's a song that I think is very historically important in the AC/DC story, because it was also the song that they played when they did the Live from the Atlantic Studios album in New York in '77. And for me, that's the essence of sort of Bond era AC/DC.
When we were kids, maybe Ty could agree with me. Before I really knew who AC/DC was, I always heard the song TNT. It was just like, I never even knew who AC/DC was TNT. But my first exposure to really AC/DC, the first album I ever got was the Live If You Want Blood. It was Christmas 1979. I was in 7th grade, and my first girlfriend at the time got me that album. And this leads to my number 5 pick, and it starts off the album with Riff Raff. 1979, this was the golden era of live albums. You had Kiss Alive 1, Kiss Alive 2, Frampton Comes Alive was probably the biggest selling live album ever. Thin Lizzy had theirs, UFO had theirs, and AC/DC came around with a single album. All those other ones were doubles, but just the excitement of the beginning of the song, the power of that song to this day. It's both versions are great, but the live version has always stuck with me. Maybe it's because it was memories of my first girlfriend, or the fact the visuals of the album with Angus on stage with the guitar going into his stomach and If You Want Blood. But then the funny thing was, there wasn't a song called If You Want Blood until later on. So my 5th pick is the live version of Riff Raff. Ty, Riff Raff, that live album, If You Want Blood. Any we all have fond memories. What's your take on that album?
Well, the 6-year period, right? The Bond 6-year period, and those records, those are the records that they're like tattooed on my soul. They're not tattooed on my body, but they're tattooed on my soul. I constantly am like humming those riffs, and I don't even know where it comes from. It's like the backdrop to like my everyday. And specifically that record. So the live records from AC/DC, and let's get to the Let There Be Rock movie, which is probably going to come up later, but just entirely game changing. Just the intensity. I'd never heard anything, never seen anything like this before. Like the records that I had been listening to, I was like, I had a Boston record, I had a Supertramp record, I had a Styx record. There was nothing remotely. And the first time I saw that movie and heard that live recording, it was like, oh, I put all that other stuff away for a long time, and it changed my direction. So, and it's never changed. It's never changed.
Now, you mentioned the live Let There Be Rock movie. Jesse, where we grew up, there was a local movie theater, and we used to go down at midnight on Saturday nights, and they used to do the Rocky Horror Picture Show. They would do The Wall. They would do Zeppelin, but they did Let There Be Rock. And I remember going to see it at the Stutson Theater, and they had actual amps in there. And it was and it was awesome. It was just like, that's, that was right before Bond died. It was the Highway to Hell tour. It was the pinnacle of ACDC in my book. So great commentary on that. Let's see, Ty, number 4. What do you got?
Yeah, John, just to add on to that, I think the first time I ever left any kind of show with like my ears ringing was the Let There Be Rock movie at the Stutson Theater. So that's how loud they used to play that. Yeah. So number 4 is from the Powerage record. It's song 1, side 4. It's Gone Shootin', and Gone Shootin' to me, it's very unique in the catalog, right? It's got an entirely different vibe than any of the songs that we've referenced. It's got this super smooth swing. Like, I'm really drawn to the energy of the band, but I'm also drawn to how they can just kind of dial it back and just get in the pocket and just really swing. The lyrics to me are so incredible, telling another story. It's a breakup song. It's a song with, as we know, multiple drug references, theoretically heroin references. The line that really catches me is, I stirred my coffee with the same spoon. So incredibly interesting. Long before I read Jesse's book, didn't know anything about the content of what Jesse was discovering, but I thought, wow, this song's got a lot of references to drug use, most obviously the title. And then you listen to it, and it's a breakup song. Like, another line that really captured me is how she bought a ticket of her own accord to I Don't Know, an obvious reference to a relationship breakup, maybe related to drug use by one or both of the parties. So the whole thing is so incredibly interesting, but mostly the swing of the song was something that back when I was 13 years old, there was nothing like that, and not from a hard rock band, certainly. So these guys could hit it from all sides, and I was just totally engaged all the way. So that's my number 4.
Yeah, I had that at number 2, actually. I think it's sort of in their top 3 songs of all time. You bring up the lyrics. So I was interviewing Silver Smith, who most of Powerage was about, who was in a relationship with Bon, and that's the woman that he was referencing in the song. And you mentioned the line, bought a ticket of her own accord to I Don't Know. And the full verse was, feel the pressure rise, hear the whistle blow, bought a ticket of her own accord to I Don't Know, which I was always curious about, this sort of reference to a train. And so Silver was telling me about, what was going on when she went to the United States and was sort of following Bon around on tour. And Cliff Williams had a girlfriend called Candy Petroza from Chicago, and Silver was hanging out with Bon. So they were all sort of traveling together, and they went to New York, and they didn't like it so much, and then she went out to Indianapolis, and that was where she and Bon parted ways. So she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go out to California. So she bought a train ticket to go out west. So that's what that verse refers to. And then you also brought up, the verse, the lines, I stirred my coffee with the same spoon, knew her favorite tune, gone shooting, my baby's gone shooting. So I asked her, I said, were you actually injecting heroin at that time? Because Silver was a heroin user. And she said, no, some poetic license. Gone snorting doesn't quite have the same ring. So there you go. I think that's the story of the song. And I agree with you. That's the best Bond songs are written from his life experiences and the people that he knew. And that's why I love reading them, because there's all these sort of layers of meaning to it. And autobiographical meaning, and that's the exciting thing for me as a biographer, is to kind of go back to the source material, which is the lyrics. He never left the biography or anything like that. Most of his letters to Silver were destroyed or lost, and so we have his lyrics, where he's, you know, basically telling us about what happened in his life. So they're actually incredibly important, and this is why I find some of the lyrics in the Back in Black album very fascinating, because I think that they have traces of Bond in them. But that's a whole other story.
Monisms all over the place. And great segue into my number 4 pick. And it is from Back in Black. And it's the song, you know, it's a classic album. Again, there's so many AC/DC songs, but the one track that always gets me, and I just played it the other night on the radio show, was Shoot to Thrill. I think one of the greatest segue second songs on albums. Hell's Bells ends, and they just instantly bang into Shoot to Thrill. And that breakdown part halfway through the song that leads into the solo, it's just one of my all-time favorites. And, you know, I'm not against Brian Johnson. I thought he did a great job, and especially Back in Black. It's take our opinions on how much Bonism is in there. But the Shoot to Thrill song, I have one on there, and that's the one. Ty, did you see the Back in Black tour, or did you start seeing them on For Those or Flick of the Switch? What's your take on
Back in Black? Was the first, I believe, the first concert I ever saw. Certainly the first concert at a large venue that I ever saw. So yeah.
Shoot to Thrill. What's your take on the song?
Yeah. So from that album, maybe the strongest song, like Back in Black, the title track, obviously Hell's Bells, they're the most well-known. Then there's You Shook Me All Night Long, which is, you know, you can't get away from that song. It's such a great song. I never need to hear it again, like ever. But, yeah. I mean, only because I've heard it, like, you know, so many times. Shoot to Thrill is if there's such thing as an underrated Back in Black song, the way it builds, it's just got that backbeat. It's just got that swing. It's just one of those ones that really hits you hard.
Well, as the show host, I'm able to edit and call audibles at any point, and I'm going to do it right now. Honorable mention from the Back in Black in my notes is What You Do for Money, Honey, and Have a Drink on Me. It's to this day, you know, when you listen to a song and it brings you back to that time, the first time you heard it, or that period in life. And both of those tracks are just honorable mentions. But I still to this day put Back in Black one. I think their best Brian album, obviously, but it's I never get bored with it. Never get bored with it.
I will say, you know, the line "Too many women, too many pills" in Shoot to Thrill. What is Brian Johnson writing about?
Yeah.
Right now, so my argument is that and I've done this. I've done the research on this, and I've been to Florida, met the women that Bond was hanging out with. Apparently, he was just doing tons and tons of Quaaludes, right, at that time, which was super cheap in Florida. And so the parties that he would go to out on the weekend, you know, he'd be guzzling Quaaludes, and they're all having fun on these Quaaludes. So for me, that's a kind of like an intriguing little line in that song. I don't know what a guy who was, you know, fitting vinyl roofs in Newcastle is doing, writing about too many women and too many pills, but I'll leave that to John maybe to talk about.
Well, you know, the rumors, you know, what's in that little magic book of bonds that somehow ended up in Nassau, if you will. So, Jess, what's your third? Or what's your next?
Well, hang on, we're on to fourth, right?
Well, you started with your fifth, and then you went to your second, so we just need five from you. So. What's the next one you want to talk about?
Down Payment Blues. So I think that the opening of the first few tracks of Powerage are the best music ACDC ever did. This is one of them. I think it's his best moment as a songwriter. And it has its origins in a composition that he wrote in 1976 called Rock and Roll Blues, which was basically just a scrap of paper that was auctioned a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, was auctioned, and it had a lot of the sort of rough ideas that ended up in this song. So, you know, these lines, no, I ain't doing much. Doing nothing means a lot to me. Living on a shoestring, a 50-cent millionaire. I got myself a Cadillac, but I can't afford the gasoline. Can't even feed my cat on Social Security. Feeling like a paper cup floating down a storm drain. I got holes in my shoes and I'm way overdue. I mean, all of those lines are fantastic, you know, and they're all sort of collected in one song. And so I think, you know, as a piece of writing, I think that's probably the highlight of Bon's lyric writing career. And I think, you know, as we've said before, you know, the best Bond songs are him writing about the challenges and the struggles of his own life, and that makes him relatable. You know, and I think, and to this day, you know, when people discover Bond's music, I think they feel a personal connection to it because they might be going through personal struggles of their own, as I did when I first heard Powerage. That's why I connected to it. And I think it's the thing that, you know, Brian Johnson era AC/DC lacks. It doesn't have that sort of that music of personal struggle. And I think the music of personal struggle or the lyrics of personal struggle go very well with, you know, early AC/DC, the sound, you know, the sound of the Young's guitars. With Bond's lyrics, it's a perfect mix.
Agree.
Yeah,
Ty?
Yeah, Jesse, you hit the nail on the head. The connection, right? When I meet a Bon Scott fan, and I'd say an AC/DC fan, but a lot of times you run into an AC/DC fan, and like the first song they'll mention is like Thunderstruck or something like that.
Yeah.
That's not the band that I fell in love with. It's a band that I have a deep appreciation for, and I love that the brothers were able to become perhaps at one time the biggest band in the world and still one of the biggest bands in the world and an all-timer and all the accolades that you could heap on them. But the band that I fell in love with is the band where Bon Scott is telling the stories of very personal stories, very interesting stories, and he's telling them with his wit and he's telling them with his worldly view from the street and from all of the places that he's been. And as you so eloquently put in the books, you know, you allude to this multiple times, there's a massive difference in the lyrical style of the first, you know, records up through 1980, and every record thereafter is an entirely different band, and it goes way beyond the sound of the voice. Yeah. The content of the songs is entirely different. And you can sort of draw parallels because the brothers are still involved, and the brothers certainly still had a hand in lyrical content when Brian came along. But there's such a definitive difference that to me, it's night and day. To me, it's absolutely night and day. And I never had the depth of feeling for the songs that came with each record after Back in Black. I was just slightly less invested each time, like a little bit. Like we're splitting hairs here. I still love the band, and I don't mean to sound negative about the band, but it's not the same band. It's just not the same band to me.
Yeah, and many fans think it's seditious to kind of point that out, but as you say, I mean, they are two different creatures altogether. Yes, it has the same sound, but the magic of the Bon Scott era was not only his charisma and his fantastic voice and the way he moved across the stage, and you know, the energy and the presence that he had. It was his writing. He was a great writer, and that's what AC/DC has lost. And he also had a great sense of humility too. You know, like he doesn't come across very well in some of these songs. And what's that song on Highway to Hell? You know, where he's at the bar and he's getting rejected by the woman. You know, he wasn't afraid to write songs where he doesn't come off very well. You know, and that's what makes him so appealing. Whereas, you know, sorry,
Shot Down in Flames.
Yeah, Shot Down in Flames, right? Which is about him getting rejected by a girl at a bar, right? It's not exactly, you know, fantastic for his reputation or ego. as a ladies' man to be rejected and to write about it in a song. But later period ACDC, it sort of descends into this kind of smuttiness. I wouldn't call it misogyny. I don't think it's misogynistic. I think that's sort of taking it too far. But it's just sort of juvenile and a bit kind of almost pornographic, I guess, to some degree. And it just doesn't have that cleverness anymore. And that's why I don't feel an attachment to, these songs. People joke about how many times you can put the word rock in a song title. If you look at the last few ACDC albums, right? Bon wasn't really doing that. He was writing about his personal life and his personal struggles and Down Payment Blues, he's talking about how broke he was. And so, when I wrote the book, part of what I was trying to do was find out how broke he was. And, at the end of his life, he only had 30,000 Australian dollars in his account, which in 1980 wasn't a huge amount of money. To convert it into today's currency, it's probably a couple of $100,000. But for a guy who'd been slugging it out on, the stages of Europe, Australia, and North America for however many years, day in, day out, night after night, there's not a lot to be left with. And then you look at the other guys who have gone on and amassed fortunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. It's pretty bitter. I don't think he got what he deserved.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. That's for sure. So number 3, I'm gonna probably mirror Jesse in a lot of these selections in that there isn't going to be a lot of Brian Johnson in the selections, but my number 3 is Bad Boy Boogie, and Bad Boy Boogie to me is on the list for one main reason. It follows Let There Be Rock, and if Let There Be Rock isn't the most badass song in the world, and from there you'd think, oh, we're making this record, we just punched everybody right in the face, let's dial it back a little bit, let's give everybody a little breather. And instead they come with Bad Boy Boogie, which literally just piles on to Let There Be Rock. It's one of the most Bond songs ever in its swagger and in its rebellious nature. It's a side of him. He was a multifaceted person, but he had this particular side that was like, they said stop, I said go, etc. The entire lyrical content is, you're not going to tell me what to do. It's part of the relationship he had with the band. He wouldn't comply in every single way. He's just going to do his thing, and let's see where the chips fall. And this song speaks to that. The other piece of it is, this song has that solo that then gets to the breakdown part where Angus literally hits the same note for 35 consecutive seconds, that leading to the outro solo. And it's like, but somehow it works. Like if I said to you, the lead guitarist is going to play the same note 35 times in a repetitive machine gun drum pattern, and you're going to love it. It's like, what? Like what? I need to hear this. It works so well building to the end of the song and to Bond's last chorus, his last lines in chorus. And it's just like, to me, the song was incredible because you get done with Let There Be Rock. You're like, oh, wow, I got to catch my breath with this. Right. And then boom, they hit you with this one. And it's like, man, these guys, they just don't let up. They just don't let up. And so I loved that, especially as a young teenager. I just love that.
Yeah, I think that song is overshadowed unfairly by A Whole Lot of Rosie and Let There Be Rock, actually. I think it's one of the best songs on that album, along with Overdose, which is another song that, just doesn't get the love it should.
Yeah, that's what I mean, guys. You can go in any direction. It's like I got 2 pages of stuff. But you mentioned Let There Be Rock, and that's a perfect segue into my third, the live version of Let There Be Rock from the live album. And as a young metalhead of the day and listening to that again, the feeling, that live version, how it starts out, da, 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 and Angus, and back then when it was all a novelty, and that breakdown part where, he talked about, let there be light, let there be drums, let there be guitar. It doesn't get old, and it's just, maybe it's the simplicity of the 70s. I think that's a lot of make a quick analogy, like a lot of the 70s music was a lot simpler, but had a lot more substance. So the Let There Be Rock, and then later on, that was the home of Angus's guitar solo. And then they expanded on it, and another uniqueness when, he would go into the crowd on Bond's shoulders. It was, it's just no one was doing that. And it was a way for us as fans to feel a little closer to the band, that they're a little more real. But the actual song, Let There Be Rock, I don't consider it one of their more popular songs. It stands the test of time. And is it a deep cut? No. Is it one of the more popular? No. It's just a staple. It's my number 3.
It's a staple of their concerts, absolutely, because the Angus solos just get longer and longer and longer with every year. But it's sort of become the Angus show now, hasn't it? If you're really being honest about it, the upcoming ACDC tour of America, it's just Brian and Angus now, and Brian's voice can't really hack it anymore, but Angus could go on for another 35 years, I think.
Slowing down a tad, but
so it's the Angus Young show. So but that's what people go to see. I wouldn't pay $500 for it. But there's a whole sort of generation of people who know that they will never probably get a chance to see AC/DC again, so they're going to go no matter what. So,
and it's not about us. As we get older, Tyler and I, we're in our mid to late 50s. Jesse, you're a little younger than us. So when you get to our age, it's for the younger generation. And I don't subscribe to, I'm going to go see them one more time before, they're done. Going to a stadium and paying $500 and the travel and all that really isn't at the top of my list. I've seen AC/DC. I've seen AC/DC a lot. And it's just like all my other bands. I've seen them in their prime. I think I saw AC/DC. It cost me $9. So,
yeah, what I liked about when Axl Rose stepped in, I mean, I wasn't a supporter of that in any way, shape, or form, but to his credit, he at least went back through the archives of the AC/DC catalog and said, "Hey, you haven't played this song for 30 years. Let's do this." So he was introducing new songs to the concert set list that they weren't doing and they hadn't done for decades. And I think he added a bit of freshness to the concerts that they're lacking now. I think they're still pretty much doing 70% Bond songs, and the rest are mostly Back in Black, and then some songs off the new album, which I don't rate. But like as I said before, it's all about Angus now.
I will give them credit though, because the set list is pretty dense. They're up into the mid 20 songs. Granted, a bit of them are short, but still, one of my favorite bands is Metallica. You go see Metallica these days, and this new tour is down to 15 songs, and they're putting now at least one of the 8 to 9 minute instrumentals that they've done throughout their career. It's to help James sustain the tour or the 2-hour performance. There's many factors, but why do you think, going back to the Axl point, that they did go back into the catalog? Because he could sing them, because he lit the fire?
I think he was living out his childhood fantasy of singing for AC/DC. He probably just made it a condition of his employment. Said, I want to go and, play these songs off Powerage and Highway to Hell that you haven't done. Yeah. But I don't think that was a high point of AC/DC in any way. And I think the way kind of Brian was treated was not great. And frankly, I'm amazed that he's back in the band, but it's probably the biggest commercial touring act in the world, so there's a lot of money to be made.
I'm sorry, John. Jesse,
Yeah.
did you say in not in the most recent book, but the Bond book prior, that Brian has been cut from royalties? Like, is there some, like, he doesn't get lyrical credit or something along those lines, a change to his pay structure?
He was cut out of the publishing royalties
Published, yes.
after Blow Up Your Video, which is going back some time now. So he was a co-writer on their songs up until 1988, and then after that, it was Angus Young, Malcolm Young.
Yeah.
So the lion's share of the royalties, for when songs are played on radio and when songs are used in advertising and everything else, will go to the songwriters. So the songwriters are or were the Young brothers. They weren't going to Brian Johnson. And so essentially, I spoke to someone who was very high up in the ACDC hierarchy and is very important in the overall sort of ACDC story at the record company level about what had actually happened. And around that time, around 1988, Brian Johnson and Cliff Williams had engaged a lawyer about, what proceeds were going to them from concerts, from other royalties other than publishing, and it caused a bit of a stink apparently within the band. So I investigated that as much as I could without getting sued. But it's the thing was when I wrote The Youngs, as I said to you, I wanted to write a book that was a tribute to kind of these fantastic brothers who created this amazing sound and had done something for me on a personal level. It ended up sort of being an investigation of AC/DC as a business, as a corporation. And very much I discovered, as I was writing the book, that, certain people had been treated fairly badly along the way, including many band members, and ended up writing that story. And obviously that sort of pissed off a lot of AC/DC fans too, who thought that I was sort of bagging out the band. But it's part of the story of AC/DC, the commercial side, the money side. It's very much a money-making enterprise now, just like Iron Maiden is, just like Foreigner is, just like Guns N' Roses or Lynyrd Skynyrd. These legacy acts, they're worth a lot of money. And these guys, they shored up their position and they made sure that they maximized their profits. And that's what they did.
It's a whole other discussion of that lineup of bands that you just mentioned. Some are real bands, some are tribute bands, but that's a whole nother discussion. Tyler, let's get to your second, because I know you brought some props. What do you got in your bag of tricks down there?
Well, hang on. I need to get on to number 3.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Girls Got Rhythm, which I think is one of their sort of their best sort of pop styles kind of rock songs. It just has fantastic swing. It's just an underrated track from that album that is probably the best song ever written about oral sex.
I'll have to do show research and get back to you. Great album.
Well, yeah, I just think it's a fantastic song that they managed to kind of put together while they were in Miami. There's a sort of a backstory to it, which I write about in the book, and I just think it has that sort of a swing and a kind of a rhythm that it's kind of like Gone Shootin in some ways. Just got a different kind of feel to it, to the usual sort of AC/DC song, and I wish they had written more songs in that style.
It's the first Mutt Lange album, right? And
yeah.
I noticed a production difference, obviously. But there was a little bit of a song difference. I felt like, even though they were still, Bon era songs, I felt like that was a different record, and it was leading to what I think would be a different direction, obviously, had Bon not passed. But I find that that Highway to Hell record specifically, it's a little bit of a departure. The sound quality, I actually prefer the sound of the mid 70s records up through right up until, I thought the Mutt Lange records sounded great. They sounded great, but the sound kind of changed, and almost, to me, it almost sort of like tamed it down and like polished it up a little bit. And maybe that's a record company thing, a little bit of a radio friendly nod in some ways.
I think the big difference was the backing vocals.
Yeah.
On Highway to Hell are completely different to everything that came before it.
Good point. And that was Mutt.
Yeah, and he really accentuated those backing vocals. They put Bon in the backing vocals. Listen to Highway to Hell. The backing vocals on that song. I mean, they're just completely different to anything that came before that. I actually love what he did with that album. I can see both sides. It's a bit of a debate in the ACDC fan community, I guess. What's better, Vander and Young or Mutt Lange? I think they both have their place. But I think he was the right producer for ACDC at that point in their career. I think that if he hadn't come in and they hadn't had that commercial success with Highway to Hell, and then obviously Back in Black, we might not be even talking about ACDC today.
It's a great point. The Vanda Young was the right team at the right time in the early days, and the Mutt. Great point, guys. Great point. Ty, you were gonna slide into your third.
So I've got it that I'm sliding into number two. Yeah, that's okay. Jesse, I wondered if let me put this in front of the camera. You familiar with the coin, the Perth Mint coin? I'm that nerd, right? I bought the silver dollar from the Perth Mint. I'm the guy that spent, I think something like $80 for a dollar piece because it's a commemorative Bon Scott limited edition. I'm also this nerd. I'm also like the Funko Pop Bon guy.
Okay.
I'm wearing the High Voltage shirt. You could take my word for it. That's how much, I'm 58. I'll be turning 59. That's how much I'm still impacted, by the band that we're talking about. I feel like, so I don't have terrible breakup stories. I don't have hard luck stories. I don't have I was like a Bon Scott kind of person. I don't have that. I lived vicariously through, but what the band did for me and what Bon's lyrics specifically did for me was just introduce me to a world that I grew up in the suburbs of a small city in the United States. He opened my entire world to all kinds of things that it was my first exposure to, like just Australia, period. ACDC. I didn't know what Australia was. My introduction to Australia was, and still is, ACDC. That's my introduction to Australia. So, I mean, and to an extent, London, right? England. And now I'm sort of immersed in those cultures. I'm like a huge football fan, as I mentioned before, and I can't wait to go visit these places. I'm going to London with my son next year, and I'm gonna, visit all of the places that I can. John, you know that I'm also a Motorhead and a Lemmy fan. Lemmy and Bon are two iconic, music people to me for different, but in some ways similar reasons. Anyway, just the emotions of it. And I just want to touch base, not to go back too far, but I was so appreciative of the Axl Rose tour that we got to see. I saw it in Buffalo, and I was so appreciative that he did that and that the band was willing to have him do that, step in. And the change to the set list was so incredibly striking. And to me, I hadn't seen an AC/DC show in the 15 years, and I made that number up before that I was like where I left it and I went, man, I'm so glad I saw that. I kind of went, I hate to say it, but I almost went out of obligation. Oh, I have to go. They may not be back for 4 years. I better go. When I saw that Axl Rose show and they played Riff Raff and they played Powerage songs and they played stuff that they admittedly hadn't played since Brian had joined the band. I thought it was awesome. I still talk about that show more than any other show than since Flick of the Switch, right? And how long ago is Flick of the Switch? Like, that's how excited I was about that. So, people can debate whether or not they like Axl Rose, and there's a lot of reasons maybe not to like that guy, but I loved that. I wouldn't mind if they toured with him again, quite frankly.
So it's a great point. I make the comparison. Gary Cherone, when he toured with Van Halen 3, Gary dusted off some of those Van Halen songs, the Roth era, that they haven't played in years. And, say what you want about that era, but I walked away. I saw that tour 2 or 3 times. And the same thing. It was like, wow, they're playing, stuff off Van Halen 2. They're playing Mean Streets, all that stuff Sammy couldn't, didn't want to sing. And the same analogy. Great point.
Yeah, but also it brings up the whole discussion of whether Brian Johnson should still be the singer of AC/DC. And people, critics and music commentators have been talking about this since the early 1980s, when they said Brian's voice was toast. Come around to the Rock or Bust tour in 2015 or whatever it was, 2014, 2015. He really couldn't sing anymore. And I think that's what Axl Rose did, even though I wasn't supportive of the idea of Axl sort of joining, because I just didn't think he was the right fit. At least he had the voice to be able to kind of go out and sing those songs that hadn't been sung for years, because Brian just couldn't do it. A lot of what Angus does on stage now basically compensates for the fact that Brian just can't hit those notes anymore. I still think AC/DC could go on for another 20 years if they replaced the singer.
But
then it would be it would just be Angus Young. But Angus Young, he's a tiny little guy. He still seems to be in pretty good physical shape. I think, and he doesn't seem to have any other interests other than his guitar. I could see him doing this for another 20 years, but I can't see Brian Johnson doing it for another 20 years. And then there's a whole other question of whether AC/DC goes down the sort of the KISS route of licensing the brand to another generation of musicians and doing a Las Vegas show or whatever, or an Avatar show. Because the AC/DC brand is so massive, I can see that happening. I can definitely see that happening, or selling it to a musical or whatever. But I don't think Brian's got much longer. And I think this will be the last tour with him. He's getting quite old now.
Yeah. So what was the number 2 pick?
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted. So I'm going to go right to Ride On. Ride On is... Again, one of the hidden appreciations of the band that I have. There's overt ones, right? And then another one, I said it before, when they're able to dial it back. And this is the ultimate dial it back song. It's, again, a lyrical story, a story of sadness, emptiness, but it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Like, it's as close to a ballad as you're going to get from a band of this stature. And man, do they just absolutely just kill it. Like, the personal story I have of this is that we all remember, we're all old enough to remember that, Sony came out with the Walkman in 1979. And I bought a Walkman, and the way that I used it was, I used to fall asleep with the headphones on. I'd pop a cassette in and I'd hit play with the headphones on. It wouldn't be too loud. And I would fall asleep, wake up in the morning, and the headphones would be somewhere else. But the Powerage record was one that I played 100 times. But any time that I could have Ride On in my ears, it was just like, I'll never forget. The only other record besides the Bon era AC/DC records that I sort of used as that falling to sleep tool was the Physical Graffiti record, and that put you to sleep for a different reason. But I say that lovingly. I love that record. But Ride On was, again, such a departure.
And dropping their new
such a Bon Scott song through and through. Again, bearing his soul, you know, the loneliness and the emptiness, and one of these days, you know, I'll change my evil ways, like telling his literal story, not somebody else's story. So clearly his story, so clearly his writing. That's what I loved about it.
Yeah, and you know, Night Prowler is sort of in the same vein, but it's a different kind of theme. But I do like those slow AC/DC songs. There's not many of them. They should have done more.
My number 2, I'm going to Powerage, and again, there's so many, but Kicked in the Teeth. There's just something about that song that I always gravitated to it. Maybe just the pace of the song and the aggressiveness of it. It's a fast song, and Bond's like speeding his lyrics up, and the way he's singing, kicked in the teeth again. You know, it was so that's my number 2. Powerage, that's probably my favorite AC/DC album, and like we all agree on it. So that's what I.
It's very similar to Up to My Neck in You, kicked in the teeth, I think.
Well, that's the other one. That's the other one on here. I had to make a game time decision, and and so I went with Kicked in the Teeth. But you know, we're thinking the same thing. And going on the point of a ballad, I do have an honorable mention from the '77 Aussie Let There Be Rock in Crabsody in Blue. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that song, but it's just it's sort of a ballad. It's like a slower song, and it's Bonisms all over the place, and it's just Bon. I really discovered it about 6 months ago. I was programming the Monday radio show, and I was going through everything, and I'm like, I didn't even realize I had this, and it's a great song. So we're up to number 1. We got to round the corner on this. Jesse, let's get you. What's your number 1? And this is set in stone. Your number 1 AC/DC song.
Give Me a Bullet.
Give you a bullet?
Give Me a Bullet, yeah, from Powerage, which is just fantastic. Doesn't have a solo. It's just the young brothers sort of playing together. It's got this fantastic build. And most of all, it's got probably the best bass that I've ever heard on an AC/DC track. And in the new book, I've written a chapter about it called The Powerage Bass Conspiracy. So examining the eternal question of whether Cliff Williams actually played bass on that track, and or whether it was actually George Young who was in the studio. So, and George Young has a very distinctive bass style, which you can hear on High Voltage, which is very similar bass-wise to Give Me a Bullet. So I think it all started from there, that, you know, people heard this song and they thought, oh, well, there's something about the bass in this song that is a little different to what I'm kind of used to with AC/DC. And someone actually isolated the bass track on the internet the other day. You can check it out. It's quite sort of compelling. But when I was researching these books, I came across a guy an Australian guy who had the only photos that were ever taken of the Powerage sessions. And in all of the photographs, the person who was playing the bass was George Young. And he said that he was there, that he was convinced that George Young had played bass on it. But Mark Opitz, who was the engineer, said it's all, you know, completely made up. It's a fantasy. You know, you're crazy even thinking it was anyone else but anyone else but Cliff Williams. But there's no photographs of Cliff Williams actually with the band during the sessions. And the interesting thing was that a couple of years ago, and you will like this, Ty, because you're a football fan, but an old football writing colleague of mine called Andy Pascalidis, who was a a football commentator in Australia. He now works, I think, for ESPN in India, calling Indian football games. Anyway, he's quite sort of big. He's quite a sort of big guy in the sports commentary field. But when he was a young guy at high school, he got invited to go to the Powerage sessions, and actually he and a friend took all these photographs of the band. You know, Bon playing guitar, Bon writing lyrics on the couch. He's got photographs of Angus and Malcolm and Phil and the producers and everything else. And he said that he was there for the recording of Rock and Roll Damnation, and he said that Cliff wasn't there. That George Young had done the bass. So I've had two visitors to the studio. The photographer that I spoke to the first time around, and now Andy, as a school kid, going into the studios and saying it was George Young, yet we've got the engineer of Powerage saying it was Cliff Williams. And Cliff Williams himself saying it was me, but there's no record of him or any sort of visual proof of him ever having done it. And it sounds very different to Cliff. So I've written a standalone chapter about this sort of mystery, and I think it's pretty compelling for anyone who's sort of into AC/DC history, what the truth might actually be. Because I'm still leaning to the idea that it was George himself who did it, because I've never heard any bass like that since.
Well, I can't, right. I certainly not in a position to speak to, you know, who played it, obviously, but the difference between like the bass line and Livewire, Cliff Williams or whoever played it, it's 3 bass notes in the entire song. I'm telling you, there are 3. And as you say, Give Me a Bullet has a much more intricate, and it's not difficult to play, but it's entirely different bass line, multiple notes, changing speeds. It's entirely different. So something's different between.
Much notier, more musical, a completely different kind of bass track.
Completely.
But if you listen to High Voltage, the single, it's very similar. And we know that was George Young. So George Young was a really good bass player, fantastic bass player. And he had a very distinctive style. And I've been contacted by so many musicians over the years who have all said to me, it's definitely George Young. It's definitely George Young, that Cliff Williams never played a note on that song. It's just a little thing. It's a little mystery. And I'm not saying it's definitive proof, but for me, that song, like, you know, Gone Shootin, like Down Payment Blues, is such a different song to sort of anything else that AC/DC ever did. And for me, there's this, you know, just like Livewire, there's this massive build-up in that song. There's sort of the power just sort of builds and builds and builds and builds. And it doesn't have a solo, which is the great thing about it. So I just think it's a kind of a unique song in the AC/DC canon that really doesn't get the love it should. They never play it live. As far as I know, it's never been played live. The only time that I know of that it's been played live was actually Bon with a bunch of guys that he was hanging out with in Miami in 1979. They got up on stage and they did it. But as far as I know, AC/DC has never done it live. And I find that really bizarre because I just think it's the best song off that album.
Hey, what's your number 1?
So Jesse, great segue.
Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciated at the end of the first Bon book was how you went out of your way to list Bon Scott tour dates, what venue was played, the research that you did there. I learned a lot about those tours that I didn't know, and made sure I found any show that was anywhere near upstate New York prior to 1980, because I never saw the band before 1980. And I thought it was real interesting. And Vern, you probably know more about this than I do, but I noticed that they were listed in Rochester in 1978 at the War Memorial. And I'm assuming that was our largest venue. And I'm assuming that was a support date And then they came back the following year and they headlined at the Auditorium Theater, which is a great venue and still exists to this day, but it's a smaller venue. And I'm assuming that was a headline tour. That might have been a UFO tour. So I'm curious who they may have been supporting in '78 when they came to the Big House. Just a side note. Sorry.
I can't recall off the top of my head, but from memory, it may have been either UFO or Blue Oyster Cult or something like that.
Probably Blue Oyster Cult. I think that makes sense. That would make sense.
I'd have to check the book, but by the time 1979 rolled around, they were the headline. But prior to that, they were the support act. So they were doing a lot of support acts for Ted Nugent and UFO.
And we go back and you look through the archives and you're like, oh, if I was only 3 years older.
One or two. And also in the book, back to the book for a second, one of the last pictures in the book, John, if you've seen it, is a picture from a Rochester specific show. It's called out as a Rochester show. Angus is front and center. Bon is partially obscured in the picture. I just saw it yesterday again. And I was it was so cool that of all the places where they could have been photographed and of all the things that you put in the book, it's like our house. And I love that. So I love that. So John, you said, what was my number one? It's already been touched on, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. My number one is the iconic Let There Be Rock, the most ferocious rock and roll song I had heard up to the moment, and perhaps to this day. Again, it was just so incredibly defining. The movie that accompanied it, the video that they made before MTV. Bon wearing the is it the white preacher outfit, and it's just the most iconic song. The local band called Bonfire that I referenced earlier, the photo, or I'm with the singer there, they do the most outstanding, intense Bon era ACDC. It's what I love about them, because I've seen at least a half dozen ACDC tribute bands, and some of them national tribute acts. And I think the local outfit does the most traditional Bon Scott era ACDC. They'll do a show where they do Powerage front to back in order. Who does that? And they can do it because they're playing to 150 people in a club. But oh my God, do I love that. I'd rather see that than the stadium show from the rafters where I can't see anybody, so that's my number one.
That's the great, it was in my top 5. And you know what, Ty, you're always nudging me to go. So next time they're playing, if they're doing, front to cover Powerage or not, let's make a date. But my number one, it's a photo finish. There's 2 songs. Wasn't sure which one to go with. The runner-up is If You Want Blood, because it's just a great opener. I just love the song. But my number one, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. And the reason I go with that is it's the bagpipes. It's the Bonism, telling the story. You almost get, I get choked up thinking about it. And what they do when they, with Metallica, playing that song before their opening music starts. And to this day, every time I go, I see Metallica every year. It's just like, is this not the most ultimate rock anthem? And
John, the Black Crowes do the same thing. The Black Crowes, the last song, when Long Way to the Top is playing before a Black Crow show, that the band's about to come on. So there's multiple bands that do that.
Well, it's great choice. And like Iron Maiden with Doctor, and a couple other bands will play War. I think Judas Priest does War Pigs. All great songs, but nothing tops It's a Long Way to the Top if you want to rock and roll. So
I think it's a very aspirational song. Yeah, it's for anyone who is on some sort of journey, some personal journey, whether you're a person playing in a rock band, or you're trying to make it as an actor or whatever. It's about struggle and persistence and perseverance, and that's the theme of the song, and that's why it sort of connects to people on an emotional level. And that's what's so great about songs from that era, is that there is some emotional resonance to them, And the interesting thing is that having done all our top fives, how many were songs outside of the Bon era? What, like one or two?
One.
John forced one.
I mean, I could have easily replaced, but that song to me, again, there are no rules. That one, and I did my homework. This week's podcast, we had Tony Simmerman of Knuckle Bones, the collectible figurines, the top line. And they were telling the story that when they did the AC/DC one, the band refused it and said that they want the Bon Scott one of him with the white tuxedo with the bagpipes. That's the official. If you're not familiar with Knuckle Bones, the figurines, it's limited edition, the attention to detail. And so the AC/DC camp, out of everything, not even an Angus, the Bon Scott. So, and then a track that they don't play live, they won't touch that anymore. So,
well, the best live version I've heard of that, and it's ferocious. It's kind of like a Let There Be Rock style, speeded up sort of version, is the Haymarket show in 1977, which you can see on YouTube. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a totally different kind of take on that song. And it's the band at their best. Like, they're just blisteringly fucking awesome. You can't get any better. I'm hoping one day that, the band might license, some of these early live shows and sort of officially release them, because I just think, you talked about some of the songs from If You Want Blood, the live album. Like the live version of Rock and Roll Damnation on that album is fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic. I think it even beats the studio version. And AC/DC haven't done a lot of kind of archival releases apart from Bonfire. I don't really know if they've done anything else where they've actually gone back into their archives and released stuff. And I know that they have stuff. They recorded a lot of shows for the If You Want Blood live album that were never used. They're out there. There's film footage of them out there that's never been released. There's concerts that were recorded that have never been released, and I think it's a great time to do it.
Some people have done a really good job collating old, let's say, unreleased songs. YouTube is a great place to find. That's where I found Carry Me Home and Crabsody in Blue and some of the songs that we've mentioned and some that we haven't. Cold Hearted Man. There are not fewer than 12, 13, 14, 15 songs out there that if you only know the records that you could buy in a record store, there's a couple of records worth of stuff out there that you can find if you're interested, for sure.
Yeah, thank God for YouTube. But unfortunately, their record company seems to be taking down a lot of, unauthorized kind of videos on YouTube.
Yeah, so, the YouTube police, they're tough. Yeah. I'm getting alerts on our channel left and right, and it's getting worse. But, you say thank God. Well, thank God that Jesse Fink is lending his writing skills to chronicle the AC/DC. Again, the 3 books, The Youngs, The Brothers Who Built AC/DC, Bon, The Last Highway, and the new one, Bon, Notes from the Highway. Get up to jessefinksbooks.com. Is that the best site, Jesse, or to buy these books?
Or just Amazon. Yeah, 100%. And also Bon Scott Forum on Facebook. That's the Facebook group that I run. It's been going for a few years now, and anyone who's interested in Bon's life and the sort of the real story behind Back in Black, that's what we talk about every day.
Yeah, and Jesse's very active with his Facebook group page. So get there, hang out. He'll send him a message. There's a little time delay, but he'll get back to you. Ty Hahn, thanks for coming in today. I know you got to get back to work, but great insight. Always respect your love of AC/DC. That's why I wanted to get you in here. So
appreciate that. Come on, you Spurs.
Yeah. Just want to remind everyone, get up to the Metal Mayhem ROC website, metalmayhem.com, and check out the new merch page. Tons of winter stuff. Subscribe to the pod, leave a review, and join our community. That's what we're here for. For my guests, Jesse Fink, Tyler Hahn, I'm the Vernomatic. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.